They said he never let anyone close. His wealth built walls higher than any fortress, and his life ran like a perfectly timed machine. But one accident changed everything. And when a nurse walked into his world, the reclusive billionaire had to face a truth that money could never buy. To the outside world, Liam Harrington was untouchable. His name appeared in financial magazines. His face occasionally flashed across television screens during interviews. But in truth, very few people could say they knew him. The man was a fortress of polished words, discreet handshakes, and perfectly calculated smiles. He wasn't cruel, exactly, but he was distant. Every interaction felt like a transaction, even in his personal life. Growing up, Liam hadn't been given the luxury of a normal childhood. His father, who had been groomed to take over Harrington Enterprises, had died young, leaving Liam under the strict tutelage of his grandfather, Henry. Henry was a stern man who valued discipline above all else, and he raised Liam to believe that emotions were distractions. Strength, Henry used to say, is the art of keeping your heart guarded. The moment people see it, they'll take advantage. So Liam learned to build walls early. He excelled in academics, outshone peers at university, and stepped into the family company with a cold efficiency that impressed shareholders and terrified rivals. But power had a cost. While others his age built families, took risks, or traveled the world, Liam remained locked in a routine. Meetings, flights, contracts, deals. His penthouse in Manhattan was more showroom than home sleek leather couches barely sat on, glass shelves filled with art he hadn't chosen, all curated by decorators. Even the kitchen looked untouched, like a showroom display rather than a place where meals were shared. At night, when the city glittered beneath him, Liam often found himself staring out of the floor-to-ceiling windows, unable to remember when he'd last had a conversation that wasn't about money. Then came the accident. It was supposed to be just another ride home from the office. Snow had fallen all day, blanketing the city in icy slush. Liam's driver, a seasoned professional, lost control for a single moment on a slick overpass. The car skidded, struck the guardrail, and though the airbags deployed, Liam's leg was crushed against the frame. The world blurred into sirens, flashing lights, and the acrid smell of smoke. In the hospital, his body fought to heal, but his mind was restless. The fracture to his leg left him immobile for weeks. For a man who had thrived on control, that dependence was unbearable. He snapped at nurses, ignored the recommended therapy routines, and refused to admit the fear that clawed at him in the quiet hours. What if I never walked the same again? Doctors were patient but firm. If you don't commit to rehabilitation, you'll carry this injury for life, one told him bluntly. But Liam dismissed the warning. In his world, money had always been the answer. He believed he could simply buy the best doctors, the most advanced treatments, the fastest shortcuts to recovery. But healing wasn't something that could be outsourced. Healing required vulnerability. And that, Liam Harrington had never learned how to give. Henry visited often during those early weeks, shuffling into the hospital room with his cane. He was older now, slower, his once intimidating presence softened by age. Yet he still carried the weight of wisdom. He would sit by Liam's bedside, watching his grandson's frustration build. One afternoon, after Liam threw aside his crutches in anger, Henry simply said, "You think strength is standing tall without help. But real strength, Liam, is letting yourself bend without breaking. You're not invincible. No one is. And the sooner you learn that, the sooner you'll walk again." The words struck him harder than any surgeon's warning. But Liam wasn't ready to listen, not yet. It would take someone else, someone unexpected, to break through his pride. Amara Johnson was used to stubborn patients. At 41, with nearly 2 decades of nursing under her belt, she had seen every shade of resistance, from frightened children who wouldn't let her take their temperature to hardened veterans who refused to admit pain. But nothing quite prepared her for Liam Harrington. She first encountered him not in his penthouse or a private clinic, but during a shift at Sunset Grove Nursing Home, where Henry Harrington was a resident. Amara was respected there for her patience and her dedication, known for staying after hours to comfort lonely patients or improvising little art projects to lift their spirits. Henry admired her greatly, and when he heard his grandson needed rehabilitation, he didn't hesitate to suggest her name. At first, Amara wasn't keen. "I already have a full caseload," she told the administrator, "and if he's anything like the men I've read about in the business section, I'm not sure he'll listen." But Henry insisted. He needs someone who sees him as a man, not as a title. "You're the only one I trust to do that." When she walked into Liam's private rehab suite for the first time, she found him scrolling through his phone, not even glancing up. His leg was strapped in a brace, and crutches leaned untouched in the corner. Without introduction, he muttered, "You're late." Amara raised an eyebrow. "No, I was with another patient. You'll get my full attention now." Liam's eyes flicked up, surprised at her tone. Most people in his orbit tripped over themselves to apologize, to please him. This nurse, this woman in simple scrubs with tired eyes and a calm voice didn't seem impressed. She handed him a cane and said, "Stand up." He frowned. "It's not that simple." "Of course it isn't," she said matter-of-factly. "But if you don't start today, it will only be harder tomorrow." Their first session was brutal. Liam argued, resisted, complained. Every stretch felt like a battle. But Amara never raised her voice. She corrected his form, counted his repetitions, and reminded him that progress didn't come without pain. When he accused her of pushing too hard, she met his glare and said, "I'm not here to coddle you. I'm here to get you back on your feet. If you want someone to tell you it's fine to give up, call your board of directors. If you want to walk, listen to me." Something about her words unsettled him. She didn't see a billionaire. She didn't see a last name worth billions. She saw a man with a broken leg who needed help, and who was, at that moment, being very difficult. Henry often watched these sessions with quiet satisfaction. "She's the first person in years who doesn't bend to you," he chuckled one afternoon. Liam scowled, but secretly knew his grandfather was right. Over time, cracks began to appear in Liam's armor. The first time he managed to stand without support, Amara clapped for him like he'd won a marathon. No one had celebrated his efforts in years, not in business, where success was expected, nor in life, where loneliness was constant. That simple, genuine joy caught him off guard. By the third week, their conversations drifted beyond exercises. Amara asked him about his favorite books. He admitted he hadn't read for pleasure in years. She asked about his childhood, and for once, he didn't answer with a rehearsed story for reporters. He told her about summers with his grandfather, building toy sailboats by the lake, memories he hadn't revisited in years. She listened without judgment, occasionally sharing bits of her own life, how she had once dreamed of becoming a painter, how she still kept sketch pads tucked into her bag to doodle during lunch breaks, how she sometimes felt invisible in a world obsessed with glamour. Each detail she shared chipped away at his perception of her as just another caregiver. She was her own person, resilient, passionate, real. And in her presence, for the first time in decades, Liam felt something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't pity. It wasn't dependence. It was the quiet, startling realization that perhaps this nurse wasn't just teaching him how to walk again. She was teaching him how to feel alive. Liam had always prided himself on routine. Before the accident, his days were carved into precise blocks: dawn workouts, power breakfasts, board meetings, flights across continents, dinners with investors. Now his calendar looked foreign-filled with therapy sessions, doctor's checkups, and long, silent hours trapped in his penthouse. The silence was deafening. At first, he refused to let anyone from the company see him like this. He ordered his assistant to keep meetings virtual, his camera firmly off, his presence reduced to a voice echoing through conference calls. The shareholders grew restless. Rumors began swirling in the press questions about whether Liam Harrington, the untouchable tycoon, had finally been struck down. That only fueled his temper. Amara, however, refused to let him wallow. She arrived each morning promptly at 8, her coffee in one hand and her patient notes in the other. She treated his penthouse not like a palace, but like any other patient's space. If he ignored her instructions, she would calmly repeat them until he complied. If he grew frustrated, she redirected his anger into movement. One morning, as he struggled through a series of stretches, he snapped, "You don't understand what it's like to fall from where I stand." Amara didn't flinch. "You're right. I don't know what it's like to be a billionaire, but I do know what it's like to fall. And the only way forward is through the pain. You're not the first man to think he's bigger than his own body, Liam. But pain humbles everyone." The words silenced him, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. He stared at her, searching for arrogance, for superiority, but found none. She was steady, rooted, almost immovable in her calmness. Over the weeks, their rhythm shifted. She would challenge him physically, but she also began to challenge his mind. She asked him questions no one dared to. Did he even like his job? Did he have friends? Real ones? What did he want out of life beyond numbers and profits? At first, he deflected with vague responses, but slowly, he found himself telling her truths he had never admitted aloud. That sometimes, when he looked out at the city at night, he felt like he was watching other people live while he stood outside. That wealth, for all its power, had left him isolated. That he didn't even know if he'd chosen this life or if it had been chosen for him. Amara didn't pity him. She simply listened, nodding occasionally, offering a word or two, never filling the silence with empty comfort. And strangely, that made Liam open up more. For a man who had everything, he realized he had no one to simply hear him. Until now. His grandfather noticed the change. During visits, Henry would smirk as Liam attempted his exercises under Amara's watchful eye. "I see progress," Henry teased. "And not just in your legs." Liam scowled, pretending not to understand, but his grandfather's knowing eyes said otherwise. For years, Liam had been a fortress. But now, cracks were appearing in the stone walls, and through those cracks, light was beginning to seep in. By the end of the second month, Liam was finally able to walk short distances with a cane. His doctors called it excellent progress, though he still had months of recovery ahead. To celebrate, his board pressured him into attending a high-profile gala downtown to chance to show the world that the Harrington name was still strong. Liam dreaded it. The tuxedo felt like armor, the polished shoes like chains. The cane at his side felt like a brand, proof that he was weaker than the image he had carefully curated for years. But the cameras would be there, the investors watching, and he couldn't afford to appear broken. Amara surprised him by stopping by before he left. She was off duty, dressed in her own clothes instead of scrubs, and for a moment Liam hardly recognized her. Her blouse was simple, her jeans casual, but she carried herself with the same quiet confidence. She adjusted his tie before he could protest, her fingers steady against his chest. "You don't have to pretend tonight," she said softly. "Let them see the truth. A man who fought to stand again. That's not weakness, Liam. That's strength." Her words followed him into the gala hall. The chandeliers sparkled, the champagne flowed, and whispers rippled through the crowd when he entered. Cameras flashed, reporters leaned in, and investors approached with carefully chosen words of sympathy. Liam forced his practiced smile, shaking hands, offering brief reassurances, but beneath it all, he felt the exhaustion rising. Then, in the middle of the evening, something unexpected happened. As he crossed the ballroom floor, his cane slipped slightly on the polished marble. For a split second, he staggered, his balance faltering. Gasps echoed, cameras snapped, and panic flashed in his chest. He imagined the headlines: "Billionaire stumbles, Harrington weakness exposed." But then, steadying him from the side, was Amara. She hadn't planned to attend, but Henry had insisted she accompany him as a guest. When she caught Liam mid-stumble, she didn't fuss or draw attention. She simply steadied his arm and whispered, "Breathe. You've got this." The crowd stared, expecting embarrassment, maybe even an exit. Instead, Liam straightened, leaned proudly on his cane, and continued across the floor with Amara beside him. For the first time in his career, he didn't hide the struggle. He owned it. The rest of the evening blurred into conversations and flashes, but one thing stood out above all. When he looked around that glittering hall filled with polished strangers, the only person who made him feel real was the nurse at his side. And in that moment, Liam Harrington realized something he had never admitted before. The world might respect his fortune, but only one person in that room truly saw him. After the gala, something shifted between Liam and Amara. The air around them seemed different, charged with an understanding that went deeper than patient and nurse. For months, Amara had seen him in his most vulnerable moments, guiding him through pain and frustration. But now, Liam found himself wanting to know her, the woman who never flinched in his presence, who never treated him like a name or a bank account. Their conversations, which had once been purely functional, "Move your leg this way, hold your balance here again," to stretch beyond the walls of therapy. While resting between sets, Liam would ask about her day, her patients at Sunset Grove, her life before nursing. At first, her answers were clipped. Years of professionalism made her cautious, but over time, she allowed herself to open. Amara spoke about her childhood in a small apartment in Queens, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs to keep the lights on. She spoke about her love for art, how she used to spend hours sketching, on park benches, dreaming of one day studying painting full-time. But life had pulled her in another direction. Her mother fell ill, bills piled up, and Amara chose stability over passion. Nursing became her path, not because it was easy, but because it mattered. Liam listened with a focus that surprised even himself. He wasn't used to listening, not really. In boardrooms, he waited for pauses to make his point. At interviews, he calculated every answer like chess moves. But with Amara, he simply absorbed. Her voice, her pauses, her quiet honesty, detail etched into him. One evening, as rain lashed against the penthouse windows during a session, he asked her a question that had been circling his mind for days. "Why do you care so much?" he said suddenly. "About your patients, about people. Most would burn out or stop giving so much of themselves." Amara paused, adjusting his stance before answering. Because when my mother was sick, the nurses were the only ones who made her smile. They couldn't cure her, but they gave her dignity. Kindness. That stays with you. I guess I want to be that for someone else. Her words struck something deep in him. For all his wealth and success, Liam realized he couldn't recall the last time he'd made someone smile just for the sake of kindness. His achievements were measured in profits, not in moments of human connection. And as he looked at Amara, standing there soaked in the soft light of the room, he wondered if maybe that was what he'd been missing all along. The first time Liam took a step without a cane, it wasn't in front of his doctors, nor in a press event staged to showcase his recovery. It was in the quiet of his living room, with only Amara watching. It had been a long session, one of those days where progress seemed painfully slow. Sweat beaded on his forehead, frustration knotted in his chest, and he was ready to quit. But Amara's voice calm, steady kept guiding him. "Don't look at your feet," she instructed. "Look ahead. Trust that your body will follow." Trust. That was the hardest word. Trust meant letting go of control, something Liam had spent a lifetime avoiding. But as he met her gaze, something in her eyes steadied him. Without overthinking, he let the cane fall to the side and took a step forward. One step, then another. Wobbly, imperfect, but his own. When he collapsed into the chair afterward, breathing hard, Amara's face broke into a smile that lit the room. "You did it," she whispered. And for the first time in months, maybe years, Liam laughed. Not a polite chuckle, not the kind of rehearsed laugh he used at business dinners. A real, unguarded laugh. That night, long after she left, Liam sat by the window staring at the city lights. He thought about all the people who orbited his life, drawn to his wealth, his influence. Yet the one person who had helped him take those steps didn't care about any of it. Amara hadn't been impressed by his name, hadn't been intimidated by his temper. She had simply been there, steadfast, until he found the courage to move forward. It dawned on him that the accident, which he had once cursed as the worst moment of his life, had opened a door he never would have unlocked on his own. And standing in that doorway was a nurse who had shown him that healing wasn't just about bones knitting together. It was about trust. And maybe, just maybe, it was about letting someone in. By the third month of his rehabilitation, Liam had made progress that impressed even his doctors. The fractures in his leg were mending well, his balance was improving, and his gait, though still uneven, no longer looked as fragile. On paper, it was success. But the true measure of change couldn't be captured in medical reports. It was in the quiet moments that slipped between the exercises, in the conversations that had nothing to do with joints or muscles. One chilly evening, after a particularly exhausting session, Amara lingered a little longer than usual. Liam had insisted on trying the stairs in his penthouse for the first time since the accident, and though he managed them with her help, it left him drained. She set a glass of water on the coffee table and encouraged him to rest. "You don't have to stay," he said, though a part of him hoped she would. "I know," she replied simply, sitting down across from him. "But I don't mind." For a while, they just listened to the city hum below them. Liam, who had spent years treating silence as suffocating, found this one oddly comforting. Finally, he asked her, "Do you ever wonder what life would have been like if you'd taken a different path? If you'd chosen art over nursing?" Amara tilted her head, thinking. "All the time. But then I think about Mrs. Gonzalez painting sunsets even though she can barely speak, or Mr. Wilson telling stories about his youth while I check his vitals. If I hadn't been here for them, who would have? Maybe someone else. Maybe no one." So yes, I wonder. But I don't regret. Her words carried a kind of weight that no business negotiation ever had for Liam. Regret. He realized that his life, for all its success, was full of it. Choices made for him, paths chosen out of expectation, not desire. And sitting across from Amara, he found himself envying the quiet certainty in her voice. Without thinking, he said, "I'd like to see your paintings someday." The request startled her, and she gave a soft laugh. "They're just watercolors on cheap paper, hardly gallery-worthy." "Maybe. But they're yours," Liam said firmly, "and that makes them worth more than anything I could buy." For a moment, Amara just stared at him, caught off guard by his sincerity. It was the first time she realized he wasn't just opening his body to healing. He was opening his soul. It was Amara who suggested he get fresh air beyond his penthouse. "You can't spend the rest of your recovery hiding here," she told him one morning as she helped him into a new set of strengthening exercises. "Your body needs movement, but your mind does too." Liam frowned. "And where do you suggest I go?" "Every time I step outside, someone points a camera at me." "Then go somewhere the cameras don't bother," she countered. "Somewhere ordinary." He chuckled at that. The idea of being ordinary was foreign to him, but her persistence wore him down, and a week later, he found himself in the back seat of his car as Frank, his longtime driver, took them to Central Park. He hadn't walked its paths in years. For him, parks were places seen from helicopter windows or car rides, not places to simply exist. The February air was brisk, the ground still damp from melting snow, and the trees stood bare against a pale sky. With Amara beside him, he walked carefully along a quiet path, cane tapping against the stones. At first, the stares of passers-by tightened his chest, but then something unexpected happened. People looked once, maybe twice, and moved on. No flashing cameras, no probing questions. Just a man with an injury and a woman walking beside him. They stopped near a bench, and Amara pulled a granola bar from her bag, breaking it in half. "Dinner of champions," she joked. The memory of that simple gesture, sharing something so small, without expectation, lodged itself in Liam's chest. He took the piece and smiled. "Better than any 5-star meal I've had lately." They sat in silence for a while, watching joggers pass and children chase pigeons. For Liam, it felt like stepping into a different universe. No contracts, no deadlines, no performance to maintain. Just two people, sharing a snack on a cold bench. And in that moment, Liam Harrington understood something profound. All his life, he had been surrounded by people who wanted something from him. His wealth, his approval, his influence. But Amara wanted none of it. She gave without asking. She stayed without demanding. She saw him not as Harrington, the tycoon, but as Liam, the man struggling to take another step. That night, as Frank drove them back, Liam turned to her in the dim glow of the city lights. "You've done more for me than anyone else in my life," he said quietly. "Not just for my leg. For me." Amara looked at him, surprised by the rawness in his tone. For once, she didn't respond with a quip or a nurse's practicality. She simply placed her hand over his, letting the silence speak for her. And Liam knew. The fortress he had built for decades was no longer just cracking. It was beginning to crumble. For weeks, Liam and Amara built their own quiet rhythm. Therapy in the mornings, short walks in the afternoons, and conversations that stretched longer each time. It was fragile but real. Yet, the outside world had a way of intruding. It started small. A blurry photo of Liam leaning on his cane in Central Park appeared on a gossip blog. At first, it was harmless. just a sighting of the reclusive Harrington. But then came the second picture. Liam seated on a park bench, sharing what looked like a granola bar with a woman in scrubs. Headlines followed. Mystery nurse spotted with billionaire has Liam Harrington. Finally found company. Liam dismissed it when his assistant forwarded the articles. Let them speculate, he said. But the tightness in his jaw gave him away. He knew what gossip could become if it snowballed. For Amara, it was a different weight entirely. She wasn't used to cameras, let alone her face being analyzed by strangers online. Some of the comments stung people, calling her ordinary, questioning why a man of Liam's stature would be seen with just a nurse. Others spun wild theories about her motives. At Sunset Grove, whispers began circulating among staff and even patients. Tina, the receptionist, cornered Amara with wide eyes. Is it true? Are you seeing him? Amara flushed, brushing it off. It's not like that. But in her heart, she wasn't sure. What was this? She had been hired to help him walk, but now their connection was walking them into uncharted territory. She couldn't ignore the flutter in her chest whenever he looked at her too long. She couldn't deny the way her day felt lighter knowing she'd see him. Liam noticed her discomfort. One evening, after Frank dropped her home, he lingered at the curb. I can make this stop, he told her, his voice low. PR teams. Lawyers. I can make them bury the story. Amara shook her head. It's not the story I'm worried about. It's us. What happens if people keep talking? What happens if you realize they're right that I don't belong in your world? Liam's grip on the steering wheel tightened. For a man who had conquered boardrooms and bent markets to his will, this was the one question he couldn't easily answer. It was Henry who intervened, in his quiet, wise way. During one of Liam's visits to Sunset Grove, the old man studied the way his grandson's eyes followed Amara as she moved through the halls. Finally, when she left the room, Henry said, You care for her. Liam didn't answer immediately, but his silence was enough. Henry leaned back, his weathered face thoughtful. I spent my whole life building an empire. Your father did the same. And yes, we gave you a kingdom. But kingdoms are cold when they're empty. Don't make the same mistake we did. If you found someone who makes you feel alive, don't let fear drive her away. The words echoed in Liam's mind for days. He had always feared vulnerability, but now he feared something more losing Amara before he even had the chance to tell her what she meant to him. So he did something uncharacteristic. He invited her not to a boardroom or a gala, but to his family's private estate outside the city, a place hidden from photographers and press, a place he had not shared with anyone in years. Amara hesitated when he asked, Why me? Because it's the only place I feel like myself, Liam admitted, and I want you to see that version of me, not the one on magazine covers. The estate was nothing like she imagined. She expected marble and chandeliers, but instead, she found a warm, cedar-framed house overlooking a quiet lake. The rooms were filled with books, family photos, and even canvases where Liam had attempted to paint landscapes clumsy but heartfelt. This doesn't look like a billionaire's house, Amara said, surprised. That's because it isn't, Liam replied. It's just mine. As they walked along the lake shore, the crisp air filling their lungs, Amara realized she was seeing the man beneath the Harrington name. Not the fortress, not the tycoon. Just Liam. And the realization scared her, not because she doubted him, but because she could feel her own walls starting to fall. That evening. As they sat by the fireplace, Liam broke the silence. Amara, when I lost control of my leg, I thought I'd lost everything. But now I see. I was already lost long before that. You remind me of what's real, and I don't want to go back to who I was before." Her heart pounded at his words. She wanted to tell him she felt the same, that she saw him too, not the billionaire, not the patient, but the man. But fear still lingered, fear of what it meant to step into his world where nothing stayed private for long. And yet, as the firelight flickered across his face, she knew her decision was already being written in her heart.